Hey, this is Patrick Lipo, director of X-Men Legends, and welcome to a special episode of Power of X-Men.
My guest today is someone really special. He has been a game developer since 1993 and has been fortunate enough to be involved with some great projects over the years, such as Dungeons and Dragons Online, Lord of the Rings Online, Dead Reach, but most importantly, he was the director of X-Men Legends 1, which was released in 2004 to critical and fan acclaim. Please welcome Patrick Lipo.
All right. Thanks for having me. This is amazing. I mean, 2004, like that long ago now. All right.
I can't
see how my memory is.
I'm right there with you. I still feel that it's 2004. Like, how are we in 2021?
Right. Yeah, totally.
Patrick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I got out of the house and drove around in the sun yesterday. Ah, man, you don't get a lot of those days these days. So, Seattle weather worked out. So.
I agree with you. I'm in New York, and as we were discussing before we began, it's been so dreary and cold here. And this is the first time I'm seeing the sun since 2020.
Oh, man.
So I want to ask you so many questions about X-Men Legends. I know many people in the X-Men community are dying to hear your responses to some of them, but I want to get to know you a little bit more. And I'm curious, what was the first video game you ever played?
Wow, is this like a test of how old I am? Because I can give you some deep cuts.
Give me a deep cut. Bring it. I'm pretty old myself, so
okay,
I can give a deep cut as well.
I don't remember what order these are, so I got to give two things. One was my dad used to work at GE in the 70s, and he brought home like a little briefcase with a printer on it. There was no monitor or anything, and this was like a terminal where I could play Colossal Cavern. And he set me up. I was 6 or 7 or something like that, right? And I was like, go east, take key, all that stuff. So there was that, and you could kind of see what happened by just looking at the printout because it was just pooping out paper everywhere. And then the other thing is, like I had friends who had Atari, like with more money than our family. So I saw it, but really the first one I played, we had one of those standalone little TV Pong things where, it's just a thing to the TV and a couple paddles. And it had 2 games, right? Like Pong and other Pong. So yeah. So I'm old officially. But actually it was cool to see that whole industry, this whole thing, like start from the very beginning. Honestly, it wasn't, it was Space War and stuff before I was really old enough to play anything. But I feel like I saw the whole thing that, at least for popular culture. So that's pretty rad.
Was it that curiosity that sparked your passion for getting into video games, seeing your dad bringing home that printer right? with the handles and then playing Pong? I remember playing Pong with my mom, and that, sparked, I didn't go into video games, but it sparked my curiosity to play things like Nintendo and Zelda. When those games came out, those were sort of my coming of age with video games.
I'd say the thing that really got me inspired was just a tiny bit after those two was you go to bowling alleys or sometimes pizza places and they'd have video games, right? This is like era of Space Invaders and stuff like that. And Space Invaders is cool, right? You're playing it in all that black and white. Again, very old person here. But here's the thing. I went back to that bowling alley a little later. My parents took me. And I was like, oh, yeah, I want to play Space Invaders. It was color. And I'm like, okay. And then I'm like, pew, pew, shooting. And the aliens started coming down, right? It was Galaxian. And I had no idea it was a different thing. And I'm like, oh, my gosh, these things are evolving, and how cool is that? So honestly, that was a big moment for me to see not just an example, but just to see how like things just kept evolving like super quickly at that time, right? There weren't a lot of genres. So like there was some crazy new thing every time you turned around, especially in the arcade heydays, that super early 80s there. So So yeah, I guess just seeing all that sort of variety and again, like there was one upmanship. It was sort of like, yeah, this is a better maze game, but there were a lot of just really, very different takes on the same thing. Even like Centipede versus Space Invaders. I mean, what a different game, even though it's mostly the same thing, right? So it was really inspiring.
I have to tell you, just listening to you speak right now, I miss going to Pizza Hut or the bowling alley and seeing an arcade right there and begging your parents for quarters or getting that dollar and
Yep.
like that crumbled dollar and having to straighten it out, put it in like a machine that dispenses quarters, and then just spend your entire Saturday night playing on these games with like completely, like they were all different and complete strangers. You were just making friends.
Yeah. You just play against whoever, and put the quarter up for the next game. And a little later, Street Fighter and all that came, where there was a lot more competitive. But really, you were just kind of like trying to show up the last person, who just got there. Like I went in after somebody got done in pole position and like just wrecked, and then I was just like, somehow this had this amazing game where I was like going full speed and like leaving everything. And I had no idea how I did so well, but they were just like, oh my gosh, behind me. So that was cool.
So you were prodigious with video games since the start.
All right. That was all right.
And did you ever play the X-Men arcade video game?
Oh yeah. There was the full, like, the big wide one, right? You play the narrow one, yeah, it's okay, but you get the big wide one with the 3 screens and the 6 controllers. That was a real big one with me. There was one in my college union. Go down there and play a few quarters pretty much every lunch. So that was a great one. That actually that was right around when I was getting into comics too. So it was a good kind of time to, really be into the X-Men, learn about them, and see how fun it was to play Nightcrawler. So yeah.
Was Nightcrawler your character of choice?
Yeah, I think Nightcrawler is probably if you're wondering my favorite X-Men is, that's probably the guy.
Oh, that question was going to come.
Oh yeah. I always played Nightcrawler. He was kind of way over. He wasn't as bad as, I don't remember who was way over on the left where you had to play kind of like hanging off the edge, but he was kind of off to the side.
I love that you mentioned you were playing the X-Men arcade game in your student union. And I don't want to jump ahead to my questions about X-Men Legends, but when Activision was sort of rolling out X-Men Legends, my student union had someone from X-Men Legends there. It could have been X-Men Legends 2 now that I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
But there was someone there with like a clunky, like, because I'm old too, a clunky like TV with an Xbox set up to it. And you could like test drive playing X-Men Legends there. I don't know what that was about. It was definitely for Apocalypse, because I even got the shirt that they gave afterwards.
Oh, this guy, right?
Yeah, right there.
That was two.
Listeners, he has X-Men Legends 2. Is it Rise of Apocalypse, I believe is the title?
Rise of Apocalypse.
It's Rise of Apocalypse. He has a poster right behind him, and it's Apocalypse's face with his eyes up there.
Yeah, a friend from the studio set me up with that. I wasn't on X-Men 2, but got to have the signed stuff.
I want to know, so Nightcrawler is your favorite X-Men.
Oh, yeah.
What was the earliest memory you had of the X-Men? And I know you kind of came into comics late, as you just mentioned, but were the X-Men ever, can you remember when you first heard about them? Were they ever in the background of your life as you were coming of age and growing up? Did you read any of the comics?
I had a friend in the 80s who collected, like, full-on collected comics, during that sort of, rise of that era. With Killing Joke and all these, that sort of like Batman was hitting it big, and the X-Men were, had a really, really amazing run there. And but he was like pretty hardcore. He had like a big wall where he had like little mini shelves, and everything was in like Mylar bags and the full deal. So I wasn't able to read those, but he had a bunch of trade paperbacks, and so I was able to read some of the X-Men there, and that was really cool because I think I'd heard a few of the characters at some point. People might mention it or something, and but I didn't know who Wolverine was or anything like that. I can't remember what my first X-Men character I knew was,
So wild.
but yeah, you know, I was kind of able to collect vicariously with that guy. And then when I got to college, that's when I started buying it, which when like the whole universe started buying comics, and there were 65 covers for every release, and you know, new two new X-Men a week, you know, pretty easily for a little while there, I swear. That and Batman. So I bought all of it, the terrible stuff, everything. So
We've had some really great guests on this podcast, and we all talk about the 90s and that X-Men boom. We had the Lee Waltz who created the X-Men animated series, and they were talking about how they were just pitching a show about the X-Men, and they wanted it, you know, to have a lot of heart. So they approached it as writers first, and like then they became fans. So they would have Marvel like fax over all of this information about the X-Men, and they were like shocked at how much like continuity and everything was going on, and how the X-Men were just exploding in the 90s with that Jim Lee redesign.
totally, yeah, that was an amazing time. I mean, you know, there was a lot of junk that came out during that era too, but really, you know, that new series with Jim Lee with the big long gatefold cover and just the look, yeah, just I don't know. There's something about that time for sure, you know.
So what did you study in college?
I was a computer science guy.
Okay. And how did you end up working in video games? Did you know you wanted to work in video games, or was it a fortuitous thing that you kind of fell into it?
Well, there was a lot of luck involved. I mean, you know, before I went to college, I was really into the Apple II, and I'd write, you know, little game programs on that, you know, like turn-based stuff. I'd adapt complicated pen and paper games to be able to be played. You know, even like Car Wars, I was a big fan of the tabletop game Car Wars, and trying to convert things to that was really big. So I was really into computers at that point. But really, you know, you go to CS and into computer science, and you just assume when you get out, you're just going to be working for some insurance company, or like Microsoft at the time was doing a really heavy recruiting around the time I was graduating, which I guess would have made me a lot of money right back in the early 90s. But yeah, whatever. But yes, it happened to be that a local company, like I'm reading through the student newspaper, and like a company called Raven Software just like put a little tiny ad in there. It's like, do you like video games and like to program? And so I went there, and you know, as you do, or you know, you think you do when you do interviews for like professional thing. I got a suit. I had none of this stuff, so I was like all super decked out in my like nerd ass suit, and like went and to this interview, and they told me later I looked like a banker. But turned out I didn't get the job. This was actually mid semester, so wouldn't have been able to start for a while anywhere. But I just checked back with him like several times and kind of did some stuff on my own, you know, to kind of prove what I could do. Made some more game prototypes and stuff like that. And then yeah, they finally just needed some help, and there I was. So that was. But again, this was in Madison, Wisconsin, like the middle of Wisconsin. Like, you know, who knew there were any game developers there? You know, like no real people ever made video games anyway, right? Like, back then, it's like who designs toys or roller coasters, right? There's some leprechaun somewhere. There's no actual real people that have that as a job, right? So, so it was pretty cool to actually meet people that made them and then be able to become one myself.
One of the interesting things about the video game industry that I love, I used to work at HarperCollins, and we published a book about video game making called Blood, Sweat, and Tears by Jason from Kotaku. And he really just gets in the thick of it, that some video games, you don't even know, even after they're announced, if they're ever going to get done or finished, and what an intense process it is, and how laborious, you know, the work is, and it's driven by passion, but it's a lot of effort and work on your part. Fans are just enjoying it. We don't fucking care where it came from. So I'm curious, you start at Raven Software, which I can still picture that logo, the eye of that raven.
Oh yeah. Love that logo.
So walk me through your career from when you started at Raven to how you became director of X-Men Legends. Now, and can you also clarify, because I've seen the title kind of interchangeable based on websites. I've seen project lead and I've seen director. Are those synonymous or are they very different things?
I think they're pretty close. Honestly, that job is so different from company to company and project to project. So yeah, officially I was project lead, and there was another co-project lead, Rob G, who he came on board as sort of just supplement my work in the last year. And he's a comics encyclopedia, right? It was just a great resource to have.
I love that.
And so, yeah, I mean, when I started, I was, lead programmer on a couple projects, did a little program managing, think I was going to go in management. That management sucks. So I went back to lead programming, and that third lead programming gig was Heretic 2. So I got to do a lot of third person combat and stuff like that. And, it was like the ideal arc, I think, for people, especially at that time, or just in general, is like, all right, yeah, cool. I'll put in my time. I'll work my way up and get a better and better position. And then maybe someday I'll be able to be, project lead on a project. Right. So finally, the studio heads were just like, okay, yeah, you can be project lead on the next project, and just, we'll just have to go through a whole, with pitches and try and figure out the right thing to make. And then, you're the guy. And I'm like, oh, that's amazing. Yeah. All right. Super excited about it. And this was 1998, got done with Heretic 2. And we tried a bunch of different ideas, made some prototypes for like a third person D&D thing. This is really before, I think, the first Baldur's Gate, even, where D&D as a property was sort of like, yeah, maybe someone will make a good game of that someday. And it's funny, there were a bunch of pitches that we made. I went through probably like 100 pitches from 98 to 2001, when really that's when I think it got greenlit and like full go.
Can you clarify what you mean by pitches? Do people come to you with the pitch? The only way I can liken it in my head is sort of like, as a book publisher, people would submit their pitches for a book or a manuscript, or are you creating the pitches and you're going out to people with ideas for a game for their properties? There's
a lot of different things. Generally, nobody ever takes a pitch from outside. This idea where I think there's like this myth that, like people like show up with their like, I'm an idea guy. Here's my idea. Check it out. Don't you want to make this game? Like that never, ever, 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 ever happens. But those concepts, yeah, the idea that like I alone would be the person to come up with the pitch and like, oh, this is what we're going to do. I mean, that's great. And I know there's some really, strong directors in the past that have kind of driven it that way. But in this case, nobody is the idea guy, because like ideas are dime a dozen, right? So, but in the case of like pitching games coming out of Heretic 2, actually, we at Raven, we were just acquired by Activision a little bit before Heretic 2, and we wanted to make sure that there was something that Activision was super excited about, that people in marketing were on board, and everyone was just like, yeah, make this thing, right? Not like, okay, well, we'll see how it goes, right? So we were really trying to be as diligent as we could to come up with, themes really exciting and types of games, and, like fighting games we toyed with, straight RPGs, shooters, all that stuff. But a lot of them were like one sheets that I would write, or even just small blurbs, like a couple paragraphs for different ideas. And we'd, have like a list of them and kind of pick some out, and then, maybe run some by Activision. Some of them came from other people in the company. That's actually really common, even, in any place, really, even if there's like 1,000 employees. I think sometimes there's just some ideas that just get some traction because there's somebody that's got a really good idea, or, really strong personality, or they can really get people excited about something.
Like Cheryl in accounting, it's like, we should do this. And you're like, yes.
Yeah. Well, I worked on one game where it was
Bob
like,
in HR.
some person from the financial department or something like that did a pitch, not X-Men Legends, but it happens, and that's cool. Right. So, So it's different to really come up with a pitch versus like actually moving forward and making a game. But yeah, in this case, yeah, there are a lot of write-ups and a lot of write-ups from other people. And, you know, we went through ideas for like Greek legend before God of War and Lord of the Rings. Oh, Lord of the Rings will never be a big property. Harry Potter. Oh, Harry Potter will never be a big property. A lot of funny things like that, you know. Who knows? Who has a crystal ball?
No, you're absolutely right. You don't have a crystal ball when you're doing these things, especially something like Lord of the Rings. After 1998, you had no idea it was going to take off. Same with the Harry Potter. They were just really great books.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and so they were great to pitch, but yeah, like, again, we wanted to just make sure everyone was just like, you know, let's do this. So yeah, in the end, I don't even know where it came from, but a pitch for X-Men Legends was floated to us, and we were just like, okay, do we want to do this? And we'd always wanted to make a full-on RPG. I mean, Raven's history is Black Crypt, you know, sort of a, you know, classic, more dungeon crawler. Shadowcaster was still pretty RPG-ish, and then we got more into action games and did stuff that was sort of RPG light, like Mage Slayer and Take No Prisoners after that. But yeah, you know, RPG is definitely a big thing that Raven was into. Comic books, of course, you know, there are a lot of fans there. So that was one we really wanted to jump on and go with.
So what did the X-Men Legends pitch look like when you first looked at it?
That's a funny one. I mean, I know I've told this story a few times in the past. The original X-Men Legends pitch was it was a full-on turn-based Final Fantasy VII experience. Like, it was like, really? X-Men line up on the left side, right? There's three of them, and then there's, you know, some enemies on the other side. You scroll through, attack, block, you know, whatever. You know, oh, I'm going to cast a power, you know, menu opens up, sub menu, you know, Wolverine's claw powers, you know.
Thank you for not doing that.
Yeah. Well, I think it could be an amazing game. It just wasn't really, like, there weren't enough people. Like, I was getting into Japanese RPGs at the time, and I played a lot of the old school American RPGs like Wizardry and all this stuff back in the 80s. But that sort of JRPG style was pretty alien to a lot of the people in the company, and so it just didn't feel right. And I think we all just wanted to kind of get in and make, you know, tap our action roots and make a game that was really something that we, you know, built on our strengths. So that was really how that evolved. It evolved really quickly. I was a little dubious. I'm like, really? You know, I asked people at Activision corporate, I'm like, you're really into that? You really want this, you know, as a turn-based thing? And they're like, yeah, sure. And then I was like, went back to the team, and we talked about it, and we kind of slowly kind of broached the topics of, you know, kind of bringing in action and stuff like that. And I think in the end, they were over the moon on it, right? Because I don't know even if a lot of folks there were super familiar with that genre. So it just turned out to be the right choice.
So you have the pitch, you sort of have a vision for the game and how you want it executed. Where do you go after that? How does Marvel get involved?
How I get involved? Well, I mean, you know, luckily Activision already had a relationship with Marvel, and I think their first game was right. I think they published the game, X-Men fighting game, right around 2000 when the X-Men movie came out.
Yeah, the Mutant Wars, I believe
it was Mutant Academy.
Mutant Academy. There
we go. Two of those.
Yes.
So they had a relationship, and also 2000, I think, was when the Neversoft Spider-Man game was out too. So they had established their relationship with Marvel there. They were even toying around with a Fantastic Four game. So there were a lot of sort of Marvel relationships already in place. You know, so they even had, you know, they had a person in place who was kind of the Marvel liaison. So another TQ Jefferson. He's just, once again, another encyclopedia of comics knowledge. It's really great to have people like that, right? Where you just kind of like get them on the horn. You're like, oh, we kind of need something to fill in this. And they're like, what about this character? You know, it was a classic from issue 236, you know, page 7. Like, cool. I didn't know about that one. So, you know, it's hard to have somebody who knows all this stuff because there's so many years to pull from, right?
Yeah. And that's a question actually I have later down the line that I want to ask you about. But let me let me ask. So you're project lead on this. How do you go about building the game then? Like, what does day one look like? Sorry.
Well, that was a funny one because we were we got it approved, but there was still a lot going on at Raven. So that first year was a really slow burn of investigating what engine we wanted to use. We'd never made a console game before, aside from an attempt at a port of an old game to the PlayStation 1 way back in the day. And we needed to make a cross platform. We wanted to be on GameCube and Xbox and PS2 and that stuff. That's just hard. Especially back then, it was really, really tough to ship on all three consoles simultaneously. So there was a lot of like technology investigation, and like we started to secure like writing and kind of hash out the story like that, and get, basically there was I wrote probably 20 incarnations of design docs that iterated through kind of ideas we had from even the earliest semi-turn-based stuff that, I was talking about before to, what the action experience would be like, what powers, what characters, all that stuff. So there's a lot of paper design. There's a lot of meetings. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of interacting with Marvel and figuring out what we can do and what we can't, right? But then on top of that, we're all helping out ship games like Jedi Outcast and Soldier of Fortune 2, and which is great, right? I mean, if I didn't help out on those other games, I wouldn't have been able to make a game between 98 and 2004. So honestly, like, you go to the office and your friends are all like working super hard on these projects, and
sounds like a madhouse.
Yeah. So I'm just like, where do you need some help? And that was nice thing is I could kind of like do stuff that I thought was really cool. So that was a nice kind of pressure release while playing the waiting game of that early phase where I'm waiting for the writing to come back and all that.
So I don't know too much about the video game industry other than, the book I helped work on back when I was at Harper. So once you have the pitch and you're moving forward with it, the first step is the writing and mapping out like the characters and their powers, and then settling on the game engine. Mm-hmm. Is that it? So
that's a good part of it. Yeah.
Okay. So what do you guys, and I'm curious about the game engine for X-Men Legends, is that something you built from the ground up, or do you recycle it from other projects?
Well, if
I'm messing up the terms, I am so sorry.
It's okay. Definitely. Heck, I don't even know if anyone ever calls the same thing in different companies. So, there's probably a million terms for everything. Yeah. And in our case, if we had been more experienced in consoles, we might've had some tech that we would have just brought forward. But in our case, we were sort of starting from scratch. Mm-hmm. Like Unreal, some engines you may have heard of, like Unreal and games like that, were really still in their fledgling state of supporting console. So we had to check those out. Even think about using the Quake Engine, right? Like some of these other game engines out there. And so in this case, we licensed one that was recommended to us. And that's all great, but really all it means is like you have a way of putting a model on the screen, right? There's no game, there's nothing, you just basically have a way of showing a scene, right? And maybe a way of like building stuff and then having it end up in the game. So that's what an engine gives you, right? Not like a proto game. You don't have anything that runs around or any of that stuff. So we got the tech going, and then we basically had to figure out, well, how are we going to make levels? How many characters can we get on screen, right? Because that was one of the big things of the early pitch was like, okay, it's going to be 4 X-Men on screen at the same time.
It was always going to be 4.
Yeah.
4, and then I know you had like some NPCs that would join in on some missions.
Right. Well, it was 4, but the thing is, like, those count against anybody you can put on screen. So say like we could get 12 total characters on screen and have it still run reasonably well. That means, 2 enemies for every 1 X-Men on the field. So even that was kind of thin, right? You kind of want to, you'd love to have way more. But yeah, in those cases, like we just kind of figured out what we could do, what kind of game we could make, and then prototype stuff, combat, how are powers going to work? How are the buttons going to map, and every console has a different button layout. So, there's just a lot of investigation and stuff where you just don't even know where you're going to end up. So I'm glad we had that time to explore those things before really hitting, production with like every, all hands on deck.
So you guys are drafting the script, and I'm assuming you have to send versions to Marvel and they have to approve or not approve, saying you can use these characters or not. Was Magma always going to be the focal point of X-Men Legends?
Well, actually, our original idea is we really wanted you to be able to feel like most of the characters have sort of understood the way that you can build them and add powers to them was somewhat fixed, right? You kind of knew what Wolverine could do and what Cyclops could do. So we wanted to have a blank slate, like a build your own X-Men was really what we wanted, honestly. And
really? So
we could just plug in any power that we had, and you could, maybe you could still build those other characters, but if like, okay, I'm going to go to my character and I'm going to make them be whatever I want, right?
So I could be Dayspring and I could give myself ice powers, for example. It would have just been like a build your own character.
Yeah,
that would have been the focal point of the story, sort of how we view the X-Men and experience the world.
Yeah, I mean, basically, no matter what, it was a neat feature, but also it helped us to introduce the player to the world. Mm-hmm. To have that blank slate where they're like, I don't know anything about the world of mutants and the Xavier College and all that, Xavier School and all that stuff. You create that character to basically be the viewer equivalent, right? So, we. Since we weren't, in the end, Marvel wasn't interested in having us have that feature. We chose Magma as that character. And I can't remember what drove that. I knew like Ultimate X-Men, I think, used Magma. They certainly at least gave us an example of what starting fresh would be, right? Like pretend there isn't 30 years of baggage with, like millions of different relationships and stuff that people have to navigate. Imagine everything's super clean and baggage light. What would that experience be? Or the movies, of course, right? That was kind of, again, I guess Rogue was kind of the character that was the Magma equivalent, coming in and learning about everything with the viewer.
Yeah, so in the movies, it was Rogue. In the X-Men animated, it was Jubilee. In X-Men, Pride of the X-Men, it was Kitty Pryde. And even in the comics, you had Kitty Pryde join the team, Jubilee later on. And, in modern era, you have like Pixie and Armor. So I love that you chose Magma. It was just such a curious pick because Magma isn't Jubilee or someone like Kitty Pryde, who on the message boards, I don't remember if this was true or not in like the GameSpot message boards in like 2003, 4. They were like, oh, they couldn't use Kitty Pryde because Kitty Pryde would ruin the boards because of her phasing ability. Like there was no way to, render her on screen.
We definitely would have liked to have had Kitty Pryde. I mean, she's kind of a fan favorite, not necessarily known by your average casual fan, but yeah, I mean, that was really one of the first things, right? Is, she can walk through anything. How do you keep her from just like, we want the player to go north and they just go east? Like what happens, right? But to be fair, Nightcrawler could have the same problems, right?
Well, that was the argument I used to do too, as well. And people would be like, no, it's not the same.
Yeah, I mean, in the end,
I agree with you.
We couldn't really do her justice in the end. I think it would have felt kind of cheap. And even like think of the Capcom games where most of them, the characters were mostly just beating people up. And then like they had one power, which was just sort of a abstraction of their abilities that they could use occasionally, and it's like, it wasn't really what we were after. Like you could probably do a Kitty Pryde like that. Okay. And then she phases through and comes up behind somebody and does some phasing thing, I don't remember what happens if she sticks your hand in someone's chest, if they like, it's just bad or they die. I don't know, but I'm such a terrible fan. I forgot.
No, the scene you're probably thinking about, because it kind of published around the same time as X-Men Legends came out, maybe a little afterwards, is in Phoenix Endsong, where she has her hand on Cyclops's heart. And she also did that with Emma. And she could squeeze the heart if she wanted to and kill them. And it's Kitty Pryde is so sad. Right? No, it's really great that you went with Magma.
No, I mean, it's funny. Like I know, like they ended up putting Kitty in 2 as an
Yeah.
NPC, but I don't believe I don't know if anyone's ever done a Kitty Pryde playable in the history of X-Men. Maybe I'm missing one, but
I think she
it's tough
had,
to do well, you know.
yeah, I think in the superhero squad online, she may have been there. I'm gonna fact
Oh,
check
that had
that one.
everybody, right? Like,
Yeah, that had like everyone, and like I don't play any of the mobile app games, but maybe she's there. But I know what you're saying. In like this console experience, we've never gotten that Kitty Pryde. But all right, you know this question was gonna come, and I'm sorry. Were there any characters that you wanted, but they were off the table?
well, a lot of our early story stuff revolved around Nick Fury and Shield being involved,
Mhm.
and that was like a hands-off property. I think it was considered to be. I guess it was just attached to Avengers at the time, and you know, there were even things where there were always lines we couldn't cross. Like, oh, that character was like, you know, 51% in this series and only 49% in X-Men, so it doesn't count as an X-Men property. You know, there are all sorts of reasons why we could use this character and not another, and Nick Fury was one of them. And this was before Iron Man and you know, like Samuel Jackson and all that stuff. But yet Nick Fury was really a compelling character that was really just starting to be on the rise because he was in Ultimate X-Men, right? And he was kind of the glue that, just like in the movies, I think in the Ultimate series, all the different Ultimates, I think Nick Fury was that character that kind of popped from series to series and kind of, you know, glued the whole universe together. So, you know, super attractive to use him, but wasn't considered to be an X-Men property. And I guess, you know, even now I don't, yeah, Nick Fury never ended up in any of the Fox
No.
movies or anything, right? So there's very strong rules about those things.
Yeah, I used to work at Marvel back in 2006, 2007, and they were very strict about the characters and, you know, what jurisdictions they had and different lawyers and teams for them. So I appreciate that hierarchy and how they, you know, manage their properties because obviously it served them very well. So, how did you guys go about selecting the final team? I think I know the answer. It's, you know, who has a really great fun power set, you know, what aren't we doing here? But I'm just curious from your perspective, how did you land with characters like Emma, who, you know, at the time did not have her a presence in other media, and X-Men Legends was the first time since Morrison that she appeared in a video game, and she was exploding at the time.
Yeah, it's you know, these are always a snapshot of the times, right? Like, so, you know, of course we knew we needed Wolverine and Cyclops and a lot of these iconic X-Men, right? But yeah, when we were picking them out, it was really a combination of characters that were kind of in the public eye, or maybe starting to get some love, you know, that they didn't have previously. You know, so part of it's that, and I think Magma actually, because Magma wasn't super new at the time, but I can't remember what was going on at the time, but I remember Magma just coming up as being a good choice because of how she was being treated, either in a regular series or in Ultimate. Again, trying to remember the
Yeah,
chronology
she
there.
she during that time was coming back in the comics, and she
Yeah,
had the New Mutants history, and she's a very beloved character. And
yeah,
I love it, by the way, I love it. I just remember thinking, what a curious choice to lead with Magma, because that was like boom, you know?
that worked out. Yeah, it worked out really well again, as I was saying. And then in the case of Emma, yeah, I mean, new X-Men was out at the time, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny, like Grant Morrison stuff was,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, cerebral and kind of weird, you know, and so like it directly as a game that we would, or sorry, a storyline or world that we would try to recreate would be tough because there were characters with just weird powers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there was the dude with the chicken head, right? Like,
Beak. Yes.
yes, there's all sorts of unusual stuff in there, and yet you know, it was just, again, another time where the series and the universe was reinventing itself and people were
Yeah.
seeing it in new light. So yeah, Emma Frost was a cool character to bring from that. It was one that we just felt it was like, you know, throw something in there was kind of maybe unexpected, and visually could be different, and honestly, yeah, we liked what was going on in New X-Men as well. So it was cool to kind of pull that out and bring it into Legends a little bit. Not just draw only from the 60s and 80s, but some contemporary stuff.
So I remember seeing the first screenshots that came out of the game, and you had the characters in their new X-Men outfit. No, they look great. They were in their new X-Men outfit, and they had more of and I'm sorry, I don't know the terms, a more of a 3D model and no cell shading.
Right.
I'm curious, how did you move away from Morrison's look and that sort of graphics to the ultimate looks and the cell shading?
Yeah, I mean that's a totally fair question. In fact, I think people look at the cell shading, or at least the outlining that we did, as a nod to the rise of those. There was that style of game, right, that was starting to come out, where it was like anime looking,
like the Wind Waker ish.
Yeah, and it wasn't really the intent. In the end, what that experience was all about, in terms of everything we chose visually, both in the environment and on the characters, had everything to do with the camera angle, right? We knew we had to see everybody from a pretty high angle. They were going to be not too big on screen because he wanted to see other X-Men fighting it out, right? So unlike a third person game where it's over the shoulder, where the character takes up like 2/3 of the screen, in height or something like that. These characters were, maybe an inch tall on your TV or something like that. So that led to a lot of decisions that we made along the way. And yeah, the first was really trying out the leather stuff, because, obviously the movies kind of set the tone. I mean, wow, what a revelation that was at that time. And then, obviously then that sort of look started to influence both New X-Men and then Ultimate as well, right? I mean, they kind of were a half and half, right, in terms of that sort of leather look, but also spandexy looking thing. But in our case, when we just do the leather and you see it from that angle, everything turns a little bit into blobs.
I got you.
And so it's got to pop off the ground. You kind of got to know what each hero, who each hero is, right, by looking at them easily. So they need a really strong silhouette. Their limbs, their arms and legs need to actually be really readable, so whether they're punching or slapping or pushing or shooting force beams or whatever, that you kind of really understand what's going on. And so the leather wasn't really great for that. But even when we tried out the ultimate look, I think there was even a period where we were like, okay, well, let's try the ultimate look. And it was better, right? You could see, it was still things, you could identify heroes a little more distinctly. And again, it read more easily as in the animations and everything. But the outline really just made those characters just pop off the ground. Because otherwise we would have had to almost have like the world's simplest floor, right? Just so you could see the characters, right? And the problem with any game where you're looking down at a space from high up is the floor is a huge chunk of what you see. So with all of that going on, someone suggested like, okay, well, we can do this really super simple thing and try an outline. And the outline was great. It was like things immediately just, were visible, popped off the screen, and it influenced our look a little bit, but I think in the end it was really more the other way around, that our needs impacted the look more than our desire to have that style,
Well, I remember being slightly disappointed when I saw the new style come in.
I know.
But then I saw the trailer, and oh my God, seeing Jean do the Phoenix Force, the Sentinels, Rogue's voice saying, "We got trouble." I proudly ate my words. And I don't know why the conversation in the early 2000s, when it came to like stuff like cell shading, was kind of like an icky conversation. People are like, "Oh no, it's going to look like Wind Waker," or "Oh, it looks like they have mittens." But now you look back on these games and it's exactly what you said. They're beautiful. Like X-Men Legends, like I think of Jean, and her telekinesis just popping on the screen there, or Emma doing psychic Bedlam and like all that around her. It did really well. And it shows you guys were video game developers first and you knew what you were doing for that gaming experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
sorry, I'm patting your back. I'm like, you were so good.
Well, thank you. No, I'm glad it worked out. Honestly, it was a bit nerve wracking, and I do actually think it. At the time it was still super important to look great in a magazine, right? Because getting magazine covers was so key, right? But yeah, I don't think they actually looked as good as screenshots, in a glossy magazine than they really did when you actually had to play and so on. Beautiful. So that was I totally understood people's reactions, but again, the reason we went down that road might have been a different reason than people thought.
And I think a lot of people probably will forget that in the early 2000s, the Ultimate books were selling pretty well, and the rumor, it was never confirmed, of course, but that the Ultimate universe was going to become the main Marvel universe or something like that. And of course that never happened, but it was being pushed by Marvel as we know we got decades worth of history in these books, but now you can pick up the X-Men and this first arc called the Tomorrow People, and it'll be accessible and you don't need to know anything. And so I understand why you would have gone with that Ultimate look, because it sends a message that you don't need to know so much about these characters coming into this video game.
Yeah.
So, some of those early screenshots, and I'm just curious about this because Colossus was in that black leather and he never got one of those costumes. And I'm just so curious, like, were you given the blessing from Marvel to take creative leaps with their looks, with these characters' looks, or were they like, no, you have to do X, Y, and Z? Because, I mean, again, the final product was pretty accurate to the Ultimate Universe, but I'm curious, again, when thinking of characters like Colossus, or maybe even Emma's alternate look where she had that white like snow gear, which was fabulous.
I'm just curious. I got stories about that, but
yeah. So yeah, no, tell us. I'm just curious how that.
No, finish your question. That's a big segue to something else. So,
so I'm just curious. Did you have that blessing from Marvel?
Yeah, I was talking earlier about how there's all the rules to go to navigate and all that stuff, and I expected a lot more, careful negotiation about the looks and stuff like that. But honestly, flip to any year of any of these comic series, and you can see how these series reinvent themselves over and over and over again. And then one video game to the next, obviously the movies, these comic book properties, just like Batman has been in so many different incarnations there, these things are reinvented all the time. So honestly, I don't think that there was any, I don't think Marvel really had any interest in kind of throttling that back. There were a few things I think they wanted us to explore. And obviously, if it looked terrible, they would have probably said, hey, that looks terrible, right? And I think they were actually very much positive about us using Ultimate X-Men, but I don't think there was any pressure of any kind in that. And the nice thing is that allowed our artists to make alternate outfits that were crazy weird and stuff like that. So try giving their own flair. We didn't have to literally do Ultimate X-Men or literally do Bryan Singer's X-Men. We could just do our own kind of take that pulls from whatever we thought, and add an extra shoulder pad here. And no Rob Liefeld going on. I don't think we added shoulder pads anywhere, but it didn't have to be like pixel perfect to any particular version.
Well, you gave us some great alternate skins. We got the OG X-Men skins, which were great. We had the Phoenix skin, which was huge. And now I'm going to ask about the Emma alternate skin.
Exactly. Right. So one thing about our relationship with Marvel, and this happens a lot when you're working with companies that have licensees, they have a lot of balls in the air, a lot of juggling they got to do. And so often they'll just recommend that you work with a certain party that they already have a relationship or trust. In this case, this was our writers were Man of Action, which is a collective of writers, Duncan Rouleau, Joe Casey, Joe Kelly, and oh my goodness, I can't remember the fourth guy, but I apologize. Um, but these guys came up with, so we kind of had our early story, like way in that first half year, right? We myself and Rob G, again, our big X-Men fan, we got together, we kind of made a story as a starting point, and then we handed it over to these guys, and they completely transformed it. They took it up 25 notches and took this story where it was mostly about Magneto, and in the end there was like another character called Zeitgeist behind everything. So the game, and again, forgive me if I don't get the story points quite right, but in the end, Magneto wants to bring the asteroid down on New York City, I think, and basically Act 3 was going to end where, oh, he didn't quite do it, and the asteroid hit, and then there was a whole Act 4 where the asteroid had hit. This was years later, and everyone's wearing like survival gear, and the Brotherhood of Mutants have restyled themselves as like Greek gods, right? So I can't remember what Toad is. It was Blob, and and like some of the heroes got transformed too. So I think Wolverine was some sort of like skeletal monster you had to fight in some labyrinth. It was like all sorts of crazy stuff going on, and of course Bishop is involved, and so there was you have that whole time traveling hook, sort of Age of Apocalypse, right? And that was always something something we started with, and Marvel kind of steered us away from using Age of Apocalypse that way. I think they were actually more into us getting into the Onslaught series, the Onslaught timeline, which I think was a little more timely at the time.
Oh, I'm a huge Onslaught fan. So
yeah, it was cool, but there was something about Age of Apocalypse that was so cool.
Oh,
and in the end, so Man of Action wrote this whole thing where there was this whole fourth act where again, like there's a wreck New York, and that like what was it, the Meadowlands, the stadium in New Jersey was like a place where like there was a big arena there, and you had to go and fight. Anyways, this whole thing, and then in a very short Act 5, you went back and managed to stop the asteroid. Anyway, this whole section obviously got cut.
That sounds incredible.
Crazy.
So that's why we had Emma in that post-apocalyptic look.
Yeah, that's the snow gear of Cyclops, and Wolverine didn't. I think Jean had some. I saw some of the outfits. I can't remember which ones shipped, but yeah, they had already built them, some of these outfits, and not a lot of content for it yet. That's kind of why we felt it was a cut we could make. It would have been so good, but you always got to ship a game, so these things happen.
When did you like kind of move forward with the pitch? What year was that?
2001 about.
So you worked on the game for 3 years until it shipped.
About, yeah.
And then, so how much lead time do you have between sending the game off to be manufactured? Like, what's the cutoff date? Is it like a month or two ahead of the pub date?
It's changed so much over the course of game development history. At the time, for a console title, this is like, you got to make the discs and get it on the shelves, and there it is at Best Buy on opening day, all that stuff. It's like 6 weeks, I think, about.
Oh, that's not as bad as I would have thought.
It felt really long because like PC games, I think you could get away with about a month. And then nowadays it's actually often very short. Digital releases, right? It's, maybe a couple weeks to make sure nothing breaks. Everyone tests it while before it actually, they flip the switch and it's available,
So I may have missed this, but why did that wonderful Act 4 get cut? Like, was it just timing? Was it just you wanted to streamline the story a little bit? Because dystopian future, going back in time to save it, that is a hardcore X theme.
Yeah, well, that's kind of why we originally went with it. I mean, in the end, what we were making was so ambitious in so many other ways, right? We were making this RPG with, totally new type of gameplay with 4 characters on screen and all the character switching stuff. We were doing it for a console, our first console project. Technology we didn't know a darn thing about. So there were a lot of risks, and often the often the philosophy of game development is like, you get two really tough things. Like you got two tokens to spend on really hard things. Only two, right? And that was two, right? And honestly, by having this whole really extended storyline and everything like that, it was sort of like a third. So in the end, like shipping it was really key. I mean, we originally wanted to have like 19 playable characters. I think we ended up with 15 in the end. So we had to cut some characters along the way as well. So, these are things that people don't always know about. And luckily, if they're playing it, they don't, hopefully they don't know the stuff that they didn't see, except for 15, 17 years later, right? So,
my God, I cannot believe 15 years later. 15 years later, and I'm still such a major stan of your work. And by the way, what you just said sounded so magnificent and grand, but I don't want to take away from the final product. Because the final product, when the X-Men arrive on that asteroid and Emma like mind controls Toad, and you have that final battle and you have the setup for Apocalypse, it was so great. And so thank you for creating such a wonderful game in the end, and for being ambitious, and for wanting a third token.
I wanted it.
But okay, wait, I do have to ask, were there any characters who were approved but were cut in the end?
Oh, well, I know we cut, let's see, I actually made a list. Archangel, I know we cut. Bishop and Havoc, those were both Act 4 diehards. I don't think we were even going to introduce them until Act 4. Marrow as a playable character, I think also was one that we did not make playable. I think they were just, in those cases, we were still able to use Marrow as a villain. But there's a lot of work you have to do to make all the different levels of abilities and, give it so that it's a character that can grow over time, like an RPG.
Oh, I hacked X-Men Legends 2 on my PC, and I like reskinned, and I get it. You have to build those. Not that I'm comparing my at-home hack to what you guys were doing, but there is so much thought that goes into building these characters and their powers versus just having like a non-playable character that's just like on auto. So yeah.
Those were always really fun to drive around though. Like all the enemies were characters, right? So, in our debug builds, we could, I could choose Magneto and play Magneto if I wanted to or whatever. And I mean, that's kind of why a lot of the villains made it over into, I think in 2, if not Ultimate Alliance, right? Those characters started to come into unlockable status. But at the time we just wanted to make sure that all the characters had a even level of customizability and all that stuff you don't get with an enemy.
So Archangel, Bishop, Havoc, and Marrow. Those were the 4 that were cut. Oh, womp, womp.
Yeah. Well, Angel, it was the wings, right? Like, and it was, of course, going to be Angel and then Archangel in the Act 4.
No!
Right? Of course it was, right?
Well, so here, this is a question I had later on in the interview, but let's just go into it now. So the website, when it launched, had all like the dark silhouettes of the characters. And someone hacked it. I forgot what happened. Someone hacked it where they were able to get all the images. So Angel was already on it. And then later when it was revealed, Jubilee's over. But you can still see her, and behind her, like Angel's wing, because it was, just pasted over her. Why in the end was Angel not? Because you're telling me Angel and then he would have been Archangel. That is badass. Was it again an issue of just being overly ambitious? You guys are already reinventing the wheel, or did you just think maybe a character like Jubilee would bring more to the table?
Oh, geez, no, it certainly was not Angel being thrown over by Jubilee for any particular reason like that. I mean, and granted, Rob G, he was a big Jubilee fan, so I think bringing Jubilee
and both characters are great.
All right, they're great. There's so many great characters there. I think, we cut these characters and we cut Archangel. That was a hard cut because we really did want Archangel. But again, in terms of character complexity, that it was like a character, with all the human parts, and then a whole nother animated character worth of wings, right? That needed to be able to do everything the wings needed to do. So that was really the big driver there. And I think that was the last cut where we we're like, oh geez, well, we got to cut our Archangel. And I think at that time we're like, roster's getting a little thin. Who can? Jubilee was another was one we knew we could do pretty easily, and just figured, let's just go with what we can do and do well. And so we brought Jubilee in there as just to kind of beef up the roster a little bit again.
She looked wonderful. She looked so wonderful, and she was part of my team.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, that's the way that always works, though. Usually, the last stuff you build looks so much better than when you're starting off. So sometimes the characters you don't expect are the ones that really come off the best.
Oh, yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't mean she looked so much better in reference to what else was in the game. The game was beautiful, but I mean, like, her look.
Which looks ugly to me, honestly, as a developer. Right? I'm just like, oh man, really? That came out okay.
I'm such a her yellow jacket. I mean, talking about what pops on screen, and her power effects were so great. Wait, I'm sorry. I am a big Angel fan. Let me see if you can see. My room is a mess, but I don't know if you can see it up there. Yeah.
Right. Nice.
How would he have turned into Archangel in the game if Apocalypse wasn't on there? Sorry. I'm so sorry.
I'll give you the honest answer. I don't remember. It was so long ago.
I know someone would ask me, by the way, thank you so much, because listeners, if someone would ask me what I was doing 17 years ago, I mean, I don't know. We asked the director of Pride of the X-Men, which was that 30-minute, TV show in the 80s with Kitty Pryde. I asked him an obscene amount of questions. I'm like, why wasn't Jean Grey on it? You're like, I just don't remember why we did. So I just want to apologize for asking these very meticulous questions.
You've probably played the game more than I have at this point. So.
But what was it like implementing that 4-member gameplay experience? Because that inspired, the rest of the series. Well, X-Men Legends 2, and then Marvel Ultimate Alliance, and it's still being used today with Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3. I mean, that was an industry game changer.
It was hard. I mean, the funny thing is, like, it started with this aspiration that would have been very doable, right? This turn-based thing that I was talking about. And so, that idea you're fielding a team just was there at the inception. It was really just up to us. It's like, well, since we were the ones that basically kind of started down the road of making it an action game, to turn it into something where you could still have the team. That was a pretty big deal. And honestly, we changed it up until, probably about 6 months before it shipped. It changed. Like, I don't think any of the screenshots, you go to GameSpot or something like that, I don't know if any of the screenshots, except for very few, have the final interface, with the heads and stuff, like in the final style it was. The button, we did a bunch of focus tests with different button combinations of how to control powers and stuff like that, and that changed again even until almost the beginning of 2004. The hardest part of this was just the fact that the core of that concept, other than playing heroes and being an RPG, was this idea of combos, right? So that's the X-Men thing. It's like fastball special, right? Like, of course, everyone knows what the fastball special is. And it's easy to just spout that out and just say, oh yeah, like just more of those. They combine, and you go through the comics, and like I went through a lot of comics trying to find places where people, where characters had combined their powers in an interesting way. And they're in there, but it's not like any arbitrary X-Men. Like what happens if Nightcrawler combines their powers with Emma Frost? I don't know, do we have to give it a, clever name? So extreme from the very beginning was this idea of a combo button. You hit a button, you got all your punches and powers and all that stuff. And then you got just a button dedicated to combo, and you hit it. And the thing happened was kind of this anecdote that kept being told, like, okay, we're going to have this thing where you hit a combo and it'll pick a character nearby and do something, or maybe the other character is going to set something up, and then you can actually do something like, okay, I hit combo, I'm playing Cyclops, and Iceman happens to be nearby, and Iceman makes a big magnifying glass out of ice, right? And then I can shoot through it, right? That's a great story. But as a player experience, it's just like I hit a button and some stuff happens, and I don't know if it's gonna like move me. I don't know if it's gonna make stuff explode, if I'm gonna shoot. Like, there's so many unknowns as a player. So even if we had solved every issue of getting it working, it still didn't feel like it was going to head to a good direction for characters. It's just for players to have a good time with combos. So in the end, it was really about having players create their own combos, calling those out, giving bonuses when they actually executed on it. And the button kind of eventually evolved into an ally button, which was, call the characters over. And so you could actually set up some combos. So that experience of like just figuring out the combat, the team stuff, there was also, we had a really great guy who was doing a lot of AI, and he did all these super clever tricks to make things work. For example, did you know that each of the X-Men would pick a section of the screen to hang out on? And then one of the other enemies would go over and say, I'd be fighting with Cyclops, and then Wolverine would be like, all right, I'm going to hang out in the upper left of the screen. And Wolverine would kind of behind the scenes say, all right, enemy, I need somebody to fight with. And one of the enemies would go over there, and then they'd fight. And then the further away they were from you, so if you're in the middle of the screen and they're way in the corner, they don't do much damage to each other. And the closer you get, the more damage they do to each other.
Really?
So there's all sorts of stuff going on to make big, long, drawn-out fights, because the problem with any game with allies is they're either terrible and you resent them because they're dorks and you wish they weren't even there, or they're so good at their job that the game just plays you and you don't have to do anything, right? Because, like, how cool would it be if you only get 1/4 of the kills? Like, that never felt good. Seriously, to play. So there's all sorts of tricks that need to be done to make a game like that work. And I can't say I even played Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 to know whether that stuff made it over. But I know that X-Men Legends 2 and Ultimate Alliance 1 were all basically the exact same game with a different wrapper.
Well,
it let them pack it with content, right? That was the amazing part.
I loved X-Men Legends 1. I mean, that game, when you guys released it, was such a game changer for me. And I remember I would even, like, on the message boards, I had like my list of characters I wanted. And I felt that very same excitement when Ultimate Alliance 1 came out. And it's not to say anything about the rest of the games that came out, because I love those games and I've played it. But
those are great. I did not want to. Those are so amazing.
They're such amazing games. But there was something about X-Men Legends 1 and that 4-member team setup that just got me so excited. It's like when I first picked up that Flare. I always say Flare, the Fleer Ultra cards from 1994, and I discovered these characters. I felt like it was a new discovery for the characters. But you know what I was really impressed with when I played the game? You got Patrick Stewart.
Yeah, so good.
How did you get Patrick Stewart? I mean, I can surmise, but I'm curious.
It's funny. We it's generally like, no matter how good your development team is or how good an actor is, you never get really great results unless you have a really great casting director and voice director. Mm-hmm. And so we used Chris Zimmerman, somebody that we'd used on a bunch of other products, Soldier of Fortune, stuff like that. And she did like Scooby-Doo cartoons and so many different cartoons during the 90s. And she's so good. And so she's able to like get these people right. And then when they get there and you're there to do recording, like she can get just the best performance out of any actor. So like, yeah, getting Patrick Stewart was so amazing. I mean, I had to look it up. Cedric Smith did the cartoon X-Men, right, in the early 90s there. Yeah. And it was good. It's a good voice. Great voice. So I just assumed we'd try and get him. But in the end, when come on, after the first Bryan Singer movie, it was like Patrick Stewart is Professor X. Come on,
I mean, till this day as well. And I'm also curious, did you ever try to get any of the other voice actors, especially since they had come back for Mutant Academy, for example?
I looked to see if I could find anything about it because I couldn't really remember. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, really, in the end, there's a lot of trust we put in that casting director, and obviously they were like, usually what you do is you sort of say, suggest who you'd like, or somebody that's sort of like this person, right? And you know, when you're kind of making requests for who to get for somebody, and so, you know, of course we wanted somebody that was sort of Patrick Stewart like, or Cedric Smith, and in that case we could get him. But I was actually surprised just looking back to see that we didn't really end up getting anybody else from that 90s cartoon. And I don't know if it was because people were busy. I liked some of the voices better than others, to be frank, in the cartoon, but there were a lot of really good voice actors in that. I mean, we got Steve Blum to do Wolverine, who's in everything. So that some of the replacements are great. I thought we did want to get Hugh Jackman. I think there was just really early talks and like, maybe we could do this, and, you know, we could give him a bunch of money, but he was super red hot at the time. I think it was really just a pie in the sky ideal thing at that point. And, you know, in the end, they got Hugh Jackman for the X-Men Origins Wolverine game, which that really was that Ultimate Alliance 1 team that ended up making that game. So, you know, eventually we managed to get him for something, but yeah, not for X-Men Legends.
The voice acting was great. I mean, that was a large part of the game experience. Magma's voice was phenomenal.
Really good, yeah.
Emma's voice, how did you guys go about? I know you mentioned you had a great casting director, but did you have to listen to any audition tapes and you're like, that's the one? Because you got Emma's voice at a time where she really had just gotten this new voice with Morrison. And of course she was in the animated series and Pride of the X-Men, and those voices were great, but you brought modern Emma into the game.
I know that was really just on our minds in terms of like that, you know, that most recent run with Emma. What happens usually is your casting director gives you a bunch of like clips, right? And they're, you know, like 4 or 5, and you kind of get together in a room and you pick one out. I can't remember what this Emma had over. I should have looked up the actor's name, but yeah, I can't remember what she had that the other people didn't have. But it did come out really well. Again, I definitely credit Chris Zimmerman a lot, but in the end, I'll give Rob G a lot of credit too. Again, co-lead. I think he really kind of knew how he wanted those characters to sound, and I think he made some great choices as well in terms of which direction to go for some of those.
Yeah, well, Lee Baker, I believe, was Jean Grey, and holy smokes, I mean, she was so great as her.
Yeah, it was a great.
And the Emma Frost was Bobby Holiday. I was going to say Bobby Holiday, but I didn't want to, because I know she came back in 2, and I remember looking her up and having her say that. But yeah, it was just such a great game, and there was so much hype in the community at the time. Did you feel any pressure, you know, as you were getting closer? Like, were you nervous? I know you've kind of, you know, hinted at that, but like, how did you deal with that as you were approaching release date?
Oh, just dealing with these names and
oh no,
we did the characters.
Yeah, if you did them justice, everything, you put everything together.
It's funny. It's something when you just go to make a game and you're just making a game, and that's cool. And then there's some sort of escalation that happens when you realize you're reliving a certain property. I mean, the company went through that with Star Wars and Star Trek and all this stuff again and again. In my case, you know, I got to go to the X2 set where they were filming it on my birthday. Right. I'm like meeting Patrick Stewart and Bryan Singer's talking to me and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, what an amazing time.
Wait. Don't blow over that. What was the X2 set like?
I mean, it was a set in Vancouver. They had certain scenes set up. I think they had a Cerebro, the partial Cerebro. They don't have the whole dome or anything like that. And the Oval Office scene. I got to sit in the president's chair, the little miniature three-quarter scale Oval Office.
Oh my gosh!
Is the opener, right?
Yeah, with Nightcrawler.
Yeah, and I mean, such great scenes, and I got to read that script early, and so that whole thing where I'm, realizing we're not just making this thing that is a property that people like, right, but is living and breathing and growing in other places as we're working, right. That was really amazing, and it definitely I felt a lot of pressure in terms of like trying to make sure we were living up to these characters. And we would argue over what characters to have. It's like, oh man, we had to deal with the fact that people were so in love with a character that we would have to ask questions like, well, what if somebody doesn't want to play anybody but Wolverine? Like, cause there's probably some folks out there that did that. Is the game playable that way? Right. Like, so, just trying to put us in the heads of any fan of any character or just specific groups, or, they like the old stuff, they like the new stuff, to make sure that all could happen. I mean, we were always trying to make sure that we gave people enough of what they wanted to see. Right. In the end, you can never feel you did everything for everyone. And I'm sure somebody said, oh, cell shading, I'm out, whatever. I mean, it's, I don't, it's not like I don't care. Of course I care. But you do the best you can to try and, give everyone what they want to see.
Absolutely. You put something out there, you're not going to appease everyone, but here we are like 17 years later, still talking about the game. So you did something right. And there's a huge, huge fan base for it still. Who was the hardest character to make?
Hardest character to make? Ooh.
You can say Beast because we hate Beast. So
Beast is one of them. I just took some notes here, and I wanted to make sure I remembered what I thought of. So Iceman, in terms of like just giving him everything that Iceman could do, and he, a lot of what he does is he creates, props, things out of ice, and then he's got to, uses them. That had a technical challenge to it, right? That we had to figure out. And Beast was another one, because
I'm not shocked. Hank McCoy is very difficult. A very difficult personality.
Well, the funny thing about Beast is like, he could have just been a guy that just punched some stuff, did some flips and kick stuff. So actually being able to use some of the abilities that we had for Iceman, where, you could double jump, right, and Iceman would go into the ice sled, and Beast was able to roll around and hit stuff. Even that extreme power where he's like calling in airstrike or whatever with his like virtual computer and stuff like that. That was all really just hard stuff to go through. We had so many ideas for Beast powers that either just didn't feel right, or were just like, it's another version of him kicking some dudes. Let's do better than that. So that was a really tough one too. And we had to have Beast. I mean, again, we kind of want to make sure we at least had
we always have to have Beast.
You gotta have Beast, right? It's just, foundation right there. You gotta have the classics.
I loved sort of the small details you did with characters like Rogue, where she would kind of absorb someone's powers, one of the enemy's powers, and also Iceman when he'd give other people the ice gloves to fight.
Right. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
Yeah, no, those were, I'm telling you, Patrick, that was mind-blowing for us X fans. We were having the time of our lives, and we didn't even see it coming. And it was those little details that you can tell that you guys were so passionate about getting the story as tight as it could be as a gameplay experience, because that was never done before. So we appreciate that. Thank
you. Appreciate it back. There were a lot of, in fact, I went through and I was trying to look at some of the powers, just going on Wikipedia and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And there were powers like that I just completely forgot we did. There's just a lot of parts that go into that sort of game, and without going back and actually firing it up and playing it again, which I haven't done in a long time.
Why hasn't the game been re-released? I mean, I'm sure there's a million reasons, but I think it did come out. Did it come out, or I may be thinking of Ultimate Alliance? Did it not get a re-release on like Xbox Platinum?
I don't know. Ultimate Alliance
I think it was
probably
Ultimate
did,
Alliance that
right?
that did.
And
But actually,
that was 360. I think it was that was on all the platforms. In fact, I think it was even like on PS2 and PS3. It was like really a really rich number of systems. And yeah, those early ones just might have been a little too focused on those older platforms, a little harder to port. I actually don't know. I would love to see this stuff, brought back and playable. I can always drag out my old PS2 or whatever, but I actually, I was Googling recently, just yesterday, and I found somebody that was trying to like remake it for PC in the Unreal Engine, and
yeah.
I guess he just, somehow pulled the models out and had them running around and doing stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I hope he gets somewhere with that,
What was it like working with the CGI team? Is that what you call it, the cut sequences? What was it like working with them? Or when you're laying out the script, do you flag parts that would be more cinematic versus gameplay?
Yeah, you have to be, you have to be really careful about that stuff, because usually there's a very limited budget of minutes of cutscenes you can have, right? For that pre-render stuff. And for X-Men Legends 1, we kind of made it, I wouldn't call it on the cheap, but it was definitely like, we had way more resources in 2, because we had Blur Studios, right? Able to do I think they did all the cutscenes and the trailer as well. Whereas in X-Men Legends, it was all in-house folk, getting that stuff together, and like just figuring out exactly what we wanted to show, and specifically things we knew we couldn't do in Engine, or we couldn't do justice if it was, right there on the screen with the game characters. There's just a lot of careful decision making that has to go to kind of like get the best bang for buck, right?
Yeah.
Even to the point where I know there's probably some story things that changed because of our ability to show it or not show it in a cutscene. Yeah.
Was there a specific character that surprised you during the development process? Were you like, wow, this character is actually a lot cooler, as I'm developing them, or I really like how this power set turned out?
Yeah, it's funny, I never was a really big Iceman fan actually until X-Men Legends. And the moment I hooked up the ice sled was really that time where the ice skating around. That was the moment for me where I just wanted to play Iceman all the time, and every time I was testing, I had Iceman and the other characters I had to test. So that Iceman really did surprise me in that sense. I can't remember if they tried doing this. I can't remember if did they make a game with more focus on Iceman. I just feel like
he appeared,
giving Iceman more love could have, who knows what sort of game that would be. A game where Iceman had that much stuff. There was I think there was a game where there was just Wolverine and Iceman and somebody else. Huh?
Nightcrawler. Was it the X2, like the bridge between X1 or X2 and X3?
Right.
And they kind of did that story bridge. So
I don't know whether it was any good or not, but
I don't remember.
Like it could be cool.
I'm sure it was great. So I'm curious about what happened with that leak on the website. Do you remember that? Like, what happened there?
Yeah, you mentioned that. This is disappointing, but I do not remember that at all. I totally do not. Ouch.
It's so different, like the way the internet and things are today versus the early 2000s. But someone did post like all of the character reveals, because you guys were slowly showing which characters were going to come out. And then someone was like, no, here's all of them. And that's where we saw originally Angel. And then, of course, it changed to Jubilee. And I was just, if that happened today with Marvel, I mean, that would be such a big thing. I mean, but also it wouldn't happen because I'm sure however they were able to hack it, wouldn't even be a path to that anymore.
Yeah, I mean,
it was such a baby back then. Like the baby, it was an awkward teenager.
Yeah, I mean, I still like. It wasn't like the internet was new at the time, but I still think like everyone was bad at it in a lot of cases. And again, like this emphasis towards like careful doling out of information and trying to get, to give a couple of the character reveals to this magazine and a couple to this magazine. That there was such a huge important thing at the time that I don't know. There's still definitely careful managed release information releases on modern games, but somehow that whole thing felt like it was a bit of a relic of the magazine time, where you're trying to make deals with different websites or magazines to try and get an extra article here and there.
Was that one of the bigger marketing campaigns you worked on? Did you have a hand in marketing?
Not really, no.
Okay.
Yeah, Activision has a dedicated marketing team, and they generally like figure out how they want to promote stuff. In fact, that's back when I said we were trying to come up with a concept that everyone could get behind. We want to make sure marketing was on there too, right? They really were stoked about it. So yeah, they sort of had their own thing, their own plan. That was something we went back and forth on, but generally they ran that sort of thing. I'd say that probably the only bigger marketing push I've been involved in is on the Dead Space series. So that EA is they eat that marketing stuff for breakfast. So that's obviously always a big deal with that.
So the game obviously ends with a big cliffhanger of Apocalypse.
Yeah. Why
didn't you come back for X-Men Legends 2?
Me personally, well, yeah. It was kind of like, I was trying to build up to this point where I was project lead, and I was like, great, now I've done this, and now I can move out of Wisconsin. Nothing against Wisconsin. In fact, I love going back there, right? But we had, my wife and I, we had always wanted to move to, the West Coast or the East Coast or something like that. And so that was kind of a good opportunity and a good time to kind of reset a little bit, and stretch our legs. So that was nice, but I'm super jealous though, because in the end, like, again, making those sequels can always be the most fun thing, right? Because we went through all the hard labor of making everything work, and everything's broken, and you just hate looking at the game for 3/4 of the time you're working on it because it just is broken in 100 ways. And then make it a sequel where like you can play it from day one, and you're just adding stuff and making it look better and all that. Those are the best projects ever. Oh my goodness. It's always so good to do something like that. So honestly, I'm I always have a bit of regret that I wasn't around for those two, for sure.
Did you play X-Men Legends 2?
I did. I played both of the sequels. Not all the way through though. I must admit, okay. I didn't actually play them all the way.
And did you play any of the Ultimate Alliance ones as well? Because again, like, I feel like all these games that came afterwards is a reaction to X-Men Legends, or in my head canon is a sequel to it. And obviously, the Avengers became very prominent,
yeah,
with the movies, but it all started with X-Men Legends.
Yeah, it was really exciting. I mean, because we really wanted to you could see what 2 was in a sense of a lot of the stuff that we wanted to do in 1. Mm-hmm. There were characters we wanted to get in. We wanted to have more stuff where you could play enemies, and, a lot of the stuff that made it into 2. We were better at simple things like menus, they just weren't as clunky as they were in 1, right? But yeah, Ultimate Alliance was really where it opened up. And I don't know I believe Activision's relationship with Marvel had expanded at that time. And then they were able to use S.H.I.E.L.D. and S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarriers and Avengers properties and all that stuff at the time when the movies were just starting to, become a big deal. That was really cool. And what's funny is when I played Ultimate Alliance 1, though, like it's kind of a stupid thing to mention, but in X-Men Legends 1, there's some code that I wrote when a character gets knocked back and hits a wall, that occasionally there's a bug, like a visual bug that appears. And I played Ultimate Alliance 1 and I saw that same bug appear once. And I'm like, for a moment, I'm sort of like, and then I'm like, well, wait, no, that means code I wrote is still in here. That's great. It kind of felt good. And I was like, some of that stuff was still in there somewhere. And all that work that the whole team had put into was like carried on into those new properties. And then 2 and 3 were new studios. And I don't believe they used our tech, maybe some of the assets, but I don't actually know much about those products.
What? I don't think there was a 3.
Well, 3 is what Team Ninja is doing. I don't think they're done yet. Team Ninja is making an Ultimate Alliance 3.
Oh no! Yeah. I'm sorry. Right. Ultimate Alliance 3 is out. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It is out. Okay, I haven't played it, obviously. Yeah. So,
I'm sorry. I think you said X-Men Legends 3. I was like, whoa.
Oh, X-Men Legends 3. Now I think
what?
Marvel knows
like,
where they.
Excuse me, I need to go break the internet right now.
No. Yeah.
So when you look back on X-Men Legends, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it was a really great thing to work on. It was hard, but yeah, it's definitely a game that I'm proud of what it accomplished. And frankly, again, like I said, I'm a little sad I didn't stick around for those sequels, but at the same time, kind of knowing it paved the way for this series is, does my heart good to know that happened, right? But I still look at it and I think of all the things I could have accomplished, like just for example, the fact that it's still like there's more that I wish I could have done with switching characters and really giving you incentives to do that. So like, even just in the sense of encouraging you or giving you rewards for like, not just playing one character. Oh, I'm Wolverine, and there's some other clowns who hang out with me, right? That I switch around, and then maybe I can build up some momentum or some other power stuff. Like there's always these things I wish I could have done. So I guess that's the case of any game I ever work on, right? There's always something, that I like. If only this were better. So, but I mean, at the same time, you're like contacting me and telling me you want to talk about this cool thing that I got to work on a long million years ago. And that's always feels great.
I literally, listeners, I stalked Patrick on Twitter.
Hey, wow.
I was like I tweeted at you. I was like, wait, you need to follow me so we can chat on DMs.
All right. Yeah, I remember that.
And I probably sent you like 4 emails. So thank you so much for even being available and talking about it, because this game has resonated with a lot of us, and we still want to see an X-Men game like this today. When Team Ninja did Ultimate Alliance 3, they had some X-Men, but it wasn't until they did their X-Men DLC did we finally get, Jean and other characters. And I think that's just made us more hungry to see another X-Men,
like a real X-Men one. Yeah.
Like the way you guys did it. You took decades worth of history, and even talking about the stuff that didn't make it in, you guys understood the X-Men, and you gave us a kick-ass X-Men story with great characters.
Thanks.
Well, except for Beast. I'm sorry.
Except for Beast. Yeah.
I'm sorry. The inside joke with our listenership is I hate Beast. And I have dedicated an entire episode of why Beast is the worst X-Men ever. So our philosophy is we love every X-Man, every character except for Beast. So just so you know, it's just a little joke. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or touch base on?
Geez, no. I mean, it's fun to keep working on new stuff and cool stuff. But honestly, I don't know. I always dream about like just pulling up a screen someday and trying to make something with that same sort of combat, a superhero kind of type of experience, maybe not X-Men with that, So I don't know. It always feels good to hear about the things that went well, and to try and recreate it someday is still sort of a dream of mine,
Patrick, if Marvel came to you or a video game developer came to you and they wanted you to do X-Men Legends 3, would you do it?
Oh, yeah. Totally. I'd be on board.
Patrick, tell me, what's the best part about working in video games?
Well, I'm doing the thing that I'd probably be doing in my spare time anyway. And I am doing that in my spare time anyway. So honestly, just working with really awesome people is so energizing. In fact, even, COVID times have been tough for everybody, right? But that like being in the office with people that are like making great art and like check out this animation and all that stuff, like that sort of experience working in games is so energizing. You come, you leave for the day sometimes and you just feel so good about how cool everything is that you're working on and all that. So that's great. And honestly, it's a hard gig, right? So honestly, I'm glad that those things keep bringing me back. I see people kind of drop out of the industry sometimes, and it's, maybe they just don't take the same joy in it as some. And I guess I'm fortunate to be able to do that, to kind of still enjoy, doing my work every day.
How has COVID impacted the video game industry? I feel video games are having a huge moment. Of all the industries that took a massive hit, video games seem to have been doing very well, exceptionally well during these very tough times.
Well, they've it's been hard for everyone, right? But yeah, we're in an industry where we're very fortunate to be able to work remotely. This is my work machine behind me, right? So I just turn around and I do my personal stuff here, and then I'll turn around and do work for the day on this other one. And that's great, right? To be able to work on Zoom and share everything and Slack and all the classic tools. But that said, we're just not as efficient as we could be, and I think it is tough that as time moves forward, I think games that were really close to shipping, like Ghost of Tsushima and other games that shipped during the pandemic time, they managed to actually get all the way to shipping without really being able to go in the office much, if at all. It was amazing, right? But the only thing I would say is that it's just not very efficient for exchanging ideas, and you don't get that energy, right, that I was talking about of dealing with people directly and kind of knowing what's in their head. So as time moves forward and games are in their earlier phases, right, if they're in the first half where they might not have all the concepts nailed down, I think that's getting harder and harder. So I think that honestly, at the point where we're able to go back to the office, I think everyone's really excited about, I gotta actually drive, half an hour to go to the office now and go through traffic and all that stuff. But it's going to be so great because we'll be that much more productive and stuff. Because again, like if we had to do another year of this, I think games would be having more trouble, is my point.
Interesting.
Just because it's, again, those earlier phases are just having a lot more trouble in products that are not as established as something that's almost done.
What's one video game that everyone should play?
Oh, wow. What video game everyone should play?
That question just came to me. I'm sorry.
Wow. Dang.
I'm just curious.
What should everyone play? Well, you know what? I won't even say, it seems like one of those, like, I should come up with some forgotten, game that no one's ever played and like drop some wisdom on there. And I can't think of any like that.
No,
I've been enjoying so much of Persona 5. It's an RPG. It's total nerdy Japanese, teenagers in school and all this stuff, fighting demons. And yet there's a real joy that they have in terms of how everything is presented. So like, even if you're not into the gameplay, just going in and they're going to a menu, just looking at a darn menu or seeing some information get pop up is done with such great style and joy and jazz. I don't know. It's just like, I just really enjoy being in that world and experiencing the way that game presents itself. And so for me, it's really just I don't know, just gave me a lot of energy about the sort of work that I do and the sort of things I can enjoy and get out of a game. That's maybe not what I typically expected, where you feel powerful, or I don't know, whatever you play a game to do, right? That was kind of different.
That's such a wonderful response. Patrick, where can fans connect with you?
I guess probably the best place is on Twitter. That's Patrick _Lipo, LIPO. At that. Not Patrick Lipo without an underscore, because I can't log on to that version of me. There's only one Patrick Lipo in the world, but for some reason I can't get into that account anymore. So it's got like 11 followers. It's not that bad. I'm not that bad. I got And then, yeah, if you want to check out AutoFire, it's AutoSpaceFire on itch.io. So you can always check that out. It's free to check out because I don't think it's good enough to ask money for yet. So you can always check that out too.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us today. I am the Uncanny Dayspring, and I am signing off.